Hi, thank you. So I'm going to present a thumbnail history of using online data in public health. So this work goes back about 15 years ago, starting about 15 years ago. And I find it useful to think of the following dimensions when I'm encountering reading about a project or starting a project of my own. What type of data are we talking about? So internet search data is the primary focus of this session, but you'll see I'll be talking about other kinds of online behavior, such as social media posts, because the techniques that are used for both, for analyzing them, are very similar. We could also think in terms of the data features. We're looking at the content, such as the text, or if an image, what's that image of? But then there's also the meta content, which could augment that content or might actually be used instead of the content, such as the time, location, and user profile. Third, I'm going to call user consent. Although it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's sort of how is the data linked and identified. So we could say, well, we don't need any consent if we're just looking at aggregate numbers over all queries, like how many times does a certain word appear in all big queries. We also might look at linked set of queries, such as we're going to now group the queries as sets of queries from some individual, but then de-identify it. And finally, we have studies that have consented subjects, so we know quite a lot about their real-world behavior as well as their online behavior. We can try to track and predict trends, correlate causes, or individual people and entities, and then finally by health concern, ranging from infectious disease, drugs, diet, mental health, and so on. Okay, so the real pioneering work that you've probably all heard of was Google Flu Trends in 2009, detecting influenza epidemics using search engine query data. So simply looking at the prevalence of flu-related words that were manually identified in Google search queries in different areas of the country. And so they trained on historical logs to determine the weights assigned to those words, and showed that it actually closely tracked the CDC results that were based on actual doctor visits, but had about a 3-week better, more timeliness. So this created a whole lot of interest, although over time, I think the project was sort of wasn't really updated, and it became sort of less accurate over time, but there's no reason to believe it couldn't be made highly accurate again. In 2011, Mark Gretzky at Johns Hopkins wrote a really seminal paper, You Are What You Tweet, analyzing Twitter for public health. Here it was social media. It looked at the content as opposed to the meta content. It looked at aggregate, but also some kinds of links between tweets, closely related tweets by the same person, but to discover how symptoms, treatments, and diseases could all be modeled. In 2013, my student Adam Salick and I had a series of papers on really trying to scale up this notion of using Twitter data for tracking infectious disease. So we looked at Twitter data from users, because at this time, most Twitter users still were allowing their locations to be added to their tweets. Among other studies, we tracked 600,000 Twitter users worldwide. So we looked at them over time. So we created what's called a word trigram model using a support vector machine. So you can think of this is a bit stronger than simple keywords. Now we're looking at were bigrams and trigrams, together with location metadata. And so we looked for tweets that indicated a flu symptom, and then we collected all the tweets by that user over a time period in order to track their location. So we could find users who were likely to be sick, and we could find users that they were in close proximity to because they were tweeting at the same time in the same place. And then we could find users traveling from one city to the other. And what we showed is we could take all that data and predict the weekly influenza rate in cities with a very high accuracy. So basically, these kinds of predictions the CDC carries out by looking at the flu data in different cities and looking at airline passenger volumes between cities. We say, we can actually do that just with Twitter data, and we can also, again, be very timely. Interesting other piece of work looking at a different way of using Twitter. Here we're going to be using the content and the metadata, again, linking groups from users. And here we're looking at foodborne illness, and I'm saying the target is to find particular sources of foodborne illness. The way it worked is we would, so in the little picture, we would look for tweets in a city of people complaining about stomach upset, then look at their tweet history and said, in the last 48 hours, did they tweet from a restaurant? And if so, let's say that could be something suspicious about that restaurant. And then we presented we aggregated the results and presented them to the Nevada Health District that was the part that was doing the restaurant inspections, and said, we suggest you consider these top 20 restaurants to inspect over the next week. And in a 3-month trial, with a nice, careful, paired control study, we found that the places we identified helped the inspectors uncover 50% more violations. Now, going back to web search, Adam went on and went to Google, did a lot of fabulous work at Google, and one thing he did is realize that we didn't have to use Twitter. He could basically apply that same methodology to web search data, because within Google, you not only have access to all the searches, you have access to the GPS of Android phones that are doing the search. And they did a much larger study for a dozen cities across the world, and did some really nice work using differential privacy to hide user identities, and again showed that this was quite an effective tool for food inspectors. And he was all set for them then to roll this out as basically a product, but then Google decided, there's not really money to be made there, plus it might make people worried when they realize how much information Google has about you. Anyways, but I think it's sort of interesting for the people here when you're thinking about search data, just the variety of things you can do from infectious disease, foodborne illness, and in the next project, mental health. So in 2020, another set of projects that I was involved with looked at using Google takeout data. And probably most of the researchers here that are using internet search data are going to be using Google takeout data. If you've never used it, just look it up. Get your own takeout data. And one of the things that we and others will be providing are tools to help you visualize your takeout data. The data formats are all well defined, and you can see every search query you've done, and when and where, and every YouTube video you've watched, and so on. So the idea of this project was, again, looking at everything you could use takeout data for, including your search history, but also your other kinds of Google data, to look for mental health concerns. The user would be consented on an app, allow the app to grab a snapshot of their data, and then finally analyze it and present it, well, in this case to the researchers, but in the long run would like to present that data to a clinician. And the kind of data features you can get, you can take a Google search query and then ask Google, say, what are the category labels? So for example, election results is given the category label news. YouTube videos, YouTube category labels, so if you look at the name of a video, 20 minutes with adorable kittens, it will say that's pets and animals category, timestamps of activities, then a temporal distribution over activity. So you can derive various features. And just as one example of the kind of mental health analysis we did is anxiety prediction. So this is an ROC curve using these features and a fairly straightforward approach based on a random forest kind of decision tree machine learning algorithm, saying, could we predict anxiety? And what's really nice, I think, about this particular study, although it was fairly modest in size, and as is a limitation for many preliminary studies, it was students who were the subjects, as opposed to like real patients or ordinary people, but students all have a high rate of anxiety. So about 50% of our students were had clinical anxiety of some degree, and we could identify them quite well. So then I guess just another couple words to say. So again, this very useful study that Greg Downing and his colleagues came up with, which will a survey that will give you the current state of the art of particularly looking just at internet search and with a real focus on the medical literature. Most of the stuff I talked about before is only published in the computer science literature. It was all preliminary work, so you really have to go to the computer science literature to find it. But here in this more general study, broken down by research categories, and as you'll see, you see the various categories there, and the process for literature review was, again, a very, very broad number of different kinds of conditions. So that all led then to AcademyHealth, working with the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation to come up with a pilot project. And now we're going to hear about some of those.